Welcome to a new episode here in the Energy Bridge. Today we have the pleasure to have Angelos Chronis from Greece this time, but with a lot of experience in London, Barcelona, now based in Vienna. And today we're going to explore architecture, AI, and smart cities. So welcome, Angelos. Very nice to have you here.
Thank you very much for having me. It's a pleasure and an honor. Really looking forward to a discussion.
Yeah.
Thank you, Angelos. And I have a very warm feeling, maybe, that you're from Greece.
That's helping always.
Yeah. So, well, to start, maybe to know a bit about your journey. You studied architecture, but now you are exploring with AI and smart cities. So, how was this journey now into the energy sector?
Yeah, so I'm from Greece, as we established. I've studied architecture because I wasn't really a great student. It took me about 10 years to finish the architecture school in the University of Patras in Greece. I have to admit I didn't really like architecture that much in its original form. And then very quickly I discovered, with the help of probably the most important mentor I had, Professor Catherine Liapi, the world of computational architecture, like the sort of like merge between computer science and architecture and research-driven design. And that's what led me to, after I finished my studies in Greece, to move to London. I studied at UCL at the Adaptive Architecture and Computation course back then of the Bartlett School of Architecture, where I learned programming about 2009. That's like already maybe 16 years ago. And I discovered my passion for programming, which was more than my passion for, let's say, CAD or other type of design. And eventually probably became good at that. And then brought myself to Foster and Partners. The firm back then had a group which was called the Special Modeling Group. It was the most well-known research group that there was on computational design, and I joined that group. Eventually then, after that, we spun off another group which was called Applied Research and Development. Now it's still one of the main research groups at Foster and Partners. I was one of the founding members of this group. We were 4 people. And I also started teaching at UCL. Like teaching for me was always been, and it still is, a huge inspiration source, because at very, very early, you realize that you're stagnating in ideas. The moment you start meeting younger people and,
Yeah, keep you younger.
Absolutely. Right? And then after a while in London, I got sick of London probably.
Okay.
Maybe also the office and some other things. And then I decided to move on. I went to Barcelona. I did a Marie Curie PhD program, which, by the way, I never submitted, so I don't have the PhD. And I worked with the Institute of Advanced Architecture of Catalonia, a private school in Barcelona, which is also very well known for its research. And that kind of like led me to a whole new world of opportunities. While before I was more sort of like on the digital side of things, like simulations and integration of simulations, where I also helped develop a lab at Foster & Partners. Eventually, I moved also to materials, to also other scales. We worked with 3D printing of clay or other sort of like, very interesting material and physical properties, but still always with a focus on environmental performance of buildings, materials and designs, and also urban side. And eventually, after 3 years in Barcelona and also teaching around the world a little bit, I brought myself to Vienna, where there was a position at the Austrian Institute of Technology to lead what was back then being developed, which is the City Intelligence Lab, which I developed further and grown, and eventually became one of the flagship labs of the Austrian Institute of Technology. And it's where Infrared City was born, initially as a research project. By the way, very few people know that infrared is actually an abbreviation that we came up with, one of my co-founders, Theodore Galanos, and it literally means Intelligent Framework for Resilient Design. So that's where the infrared part comes from. But then it got stuck, and then we had to find a sort of like domain that works. So .city worked. So that's how the company was called, on infrared.city. And then, of course, this was a successful project, and that's how it led to the development of the company, the Infrared City company, which is a spin-off from the Austrian Institute of Technology. And that's what I'm doing right now. So my main sort of like occupation every day is Infrared City, but I'm also still associated and working with the Austrian Institute of Technology, helping them continue to develop the lab. And I'm also co-directing an academic program in Barcelona, in IAAC, where I'm still teaching, which is called Master in AI for Architecture and Business Innovation.
Wow, so many topics to address today.
Yeah, that's kind of like the short story. There's a few things other there, here and there, but like, at 45, I think it's still short enough.
Super. Starting with the end, with the spin-off infrared, what was your main pain that you had inside AIT that motivated you to found infrared?
Yeah, so actually that's a pain point that has kind of driven my whole career path and also my whole research work. So even back at the University of Patras, when I was doing my thesis, research thesis, for me, the problem was always this, right? Like we brought ourselves into a moment where architecture can practically design and build any form. Back then, the big sort of like, innovation was, the sort of like the free form architecture. I can design any form and make it into a building, this sort of like sculptural idea. I always opposing to this idea. I was saying, if you're going to use the best technology that comes from aerospace engineering and naval sort of like design, you have to use it for a purpose. You have to have like, you have to increase the performance of that building or of that configuration of that like urban environment. So I was always trying to find a way to bridge design with performance. And that's what we normally call performance-driven design, right? And my focus has always been on bringing the simulation to design. So from the very early days back then, I tried to bring wind as a simulation to the form of a building. At UCL, during my thesis, I actually developed my own CFD solver. So I actually developed a wind simulation tool during my thesis. And at Foster's, I was also like developing several design systems that were actually bringing simulation to design.
So is how the wind impact in the performance of the building in terms of temperature, ventilation?
There is a lot of different aspects. Like wind is one of them. My focus has always been mostly on wind, but it's not just wind. It's solar radiation, it's thermal comfort, it's other things. It's like, everything that constitutes an interaction of the built environment and the climate is what defines the performance. It could be heat gains and solar gains. It could be pedestrian comfort, for example, for wind or other things. So eventually that was my work always. And if we even look at the work that I was doing at IAAC, at the Barcelona school, it was still like how materials interact with climate and how do we bring simulation in the design of innovative materials, etc. At the City Intelligence Lab, what we were doing when I first came there was trying to find a way to bring together all the different aspects of design, the urban scale at this point, which included climate, mobility, and other sort of topics, and to bring the simulation like as early as possible in the decision making, right? So when I have a bunch of buildings and I'm like designing a configuration of this place where we are now, right? Every design decision has an effect on the wind, on the pedestrian.
Orientation, windows.
Exactly. Having the ability to very quickly test is crucial in making more informed decisions and increasing the performance. So we were trying to find ways to bring simulation faster into design. Specifically for wind, that's very difficult. Just one simulation can take like, a whole day, and you have to set it up, mesh, etc., etc. So we developed an AI model back in 2009 together with my co-founders that sort of compressed that sort of simulation time into like less than a second, right? So essentially you could just move a building around and immediately see the result. And that was the breakthrough. And that was like early days AI, like before it was in the news kind of thing.
Before being called AI, like more machine learning?
Well, no. I mean, it was still called AI. But and for some of us, like I was teaching machine learning or neural networks to architects 15 years ago. So it's not like that new for me, and also for my colleagues and my co-founders. But it was kind of like the capabilities in 2019, which is when we developed the model, were immensely bigger. So when we developed that first model, we realized that we have something in our hands that's like really, really useful. People wanted to use it. We wanted to play with it. We had some sort of like architecture offices and like other clients like buying licenses for it. So that's what created the idea and also the incentive to build a software company out of it.
And Angelos, I'll just take you one step behind.
Yeah.
It's you lived in many different cities, right? Like you're from Athens.
I'm from Kalamata, where the olives come from.
Okay, but you lived in different big cities. So what makes a city a smart city?
Oh,
And what is a smart city?
I don't think I'm capable of like fully answering that question because like I'm not really a smart city expert. But I mean, from the resilience point of view, from the from the climate point of view, I think a city that knows how its assets, its urban assets, how its building stock and its urban furniture and its parks and its vegetation are currently performing and how they will affect its resilience is a smart city. I know people care a lot about sort of like IoT and all the economy around it. What good is any Internet of Things or any general sort of like connectivity if you have a city that is hit by massive heat waves and huge wind events, etc. So I think that we don't realize what is coming, and what is coming is not so let's say bright. I'm normally a nihilist. I like talking about the future in bleak terms, but it's also a reality, right? Like there is a significant threat for most of cities. I usually use these numbers in a pitch. 90% of all the cities in the world will face severe climate risks.
In which year? Like 2050, 70? Like this 90%?
I don't know when.
Okay.
This is just sort of like how many cities are endared. Like I mean, like I guess every city can be endangered more or less, but like that's a number that comes from UN.
Okay.
But and then there's like how many cities are planning for it, right? And then it's like only 45 or 50% of them have some sort of adaptation plan. So a smart city for me is a city that understands the challenges that are coming and has some sort of plan for them.
Okay.
And digital sort of like
is one part of it, but not the whole.
But like a digital twin, like a digital sort of representation of the city is a very important base layer upon which you can do scenarios, you can try different approaches and adaptation measures and play them out as simulations, etc. That's why I think simulation is super important in that.
And now if you could walk us through the journey of infrared and also the software solution that you have now.
Yes, absolutely. So we started with, I was saying before, these sort of like wind models, right? Like what happens if you move a building from here to there? Like how much wind will it flow around it? Especially where we are here, like actually that is a very important topic. I think you're experiencing it yourself. So we started from there, but then we brought a lot of other models, and now we have more than 20 different sort of like analytics and simulation sort of like models. We had to train models. So like keep in mind that, when you're saying I'm going to replace simulation for wind, for example, or for like thermal comfort or solar, etc., you have to run a bunch of other a bunch of like potential simulations and train a model to predict the results. And sometimes we do that with purely predictive models. Sometimes we do them with statistical models. Sometimes there's a combination of GPU computing and others. So there's a very, very different things. But we've built now a suite of like more than 20 models and like more than 500,000 simulations that we've run to train on these models. So we started at AIT as a research project. We did the first sort of like wind and solar models. Then once we spun off, we developed a full software suite around it. Right now, what we have is we have a web app where people can just directly go sign up and use the simulations. We have plugins for major CAD, BIM, GIS, essentially engines. And we've also opened up API access to a lot of our users, and they're actually building on top of that interesting applications. And today what we're seeing, which is a very interesting part, is because we have this sort of like core AI models, and then we have this agentic AI framework that allows us to generate reports and KPIs very quickly. We can now build very quickly prototypes. We've built 5 prototypes since end of November or something, since mid-November. 5 completely new prototypes with the models. And that's what we are seeing right now. We're seeing this huge acceleration in AI development and how we can really quickly leverage what we've built in terms of the backend.
And since you have been like from the beginning of AI development, are you exploring now also with agents, for example?
Of course. From very early like this. This is not just now. We know. Both my co-founder Theodore Galanos and we have a new CTO now. All of them are like essentially very, very pro AI agentic development. So absolutely yes.
So which application are you envisioning?
So our agents do multiple things, right? So first of all, there's like a reporting side. So like there's one thing is like, having a simulation done, having a sort of like result, and then explaining that result, making it a sort of like actionable insight or like, a
infography, video, summary.
any of those. I mean, like mostly like, a reporting mechanism, like, what does that simulation result mean for you?
Okay.
So if you're like, seeing a 20% of your area having super high wind for, dangerous conditions for pedestrian comfort, what does that mean? What can you do? So there's the analytics of the agent, and then there's also the recommendations. So it gives you recommendations on what to do in a certain environment. Then we now have sort of like the ability to run models. Like, so an agent can go in and figure out which simulations to run and run the right simulations. And, that's agentic sort of like modeling. So multi-model sort of like agentic AI. And then of course there's like, fetching the right data, helping the user sort of like set up a project, like set up a design, let's say simulation process. We think that as we move into the future, we will use more and more sort of like agentic workflows. It doesn't have to be necessarily agents. It can be like agentic workflows in a more general sense. But
what's the difference? Sorry.
I mean, I'm not like really also an expert on that, but like I think that, one thing is like creating a sort of entity, which is an agent that like goes and does certain task. The other is like, here's what I need. I need a report on the wind, etc. And the workflow can figure out if it has to run an agent or if it has to like, call a certain, like it doesn't have to be an agent per se, like, with a persona, etc.
Yeah, okay. Following question, we are in a skeptical region, the Dutch region. So
yeah,
how do you deal with the resistance regarding the hallucinations of AI in the results?
There is ways to control that part, right? So like, of course, AI hallucinates because it's a probabilistic model, but it depends on what you ask AI models to do, right? You can restrict AI models to only respond within a specific set of information or knowledge base. So like you don't have to always allow your AI models to hallucinate widely. So it's a bit of a balancing game of taming essentially your AI freedom, right? Let's put it like that. The agents you can let them like run freely, but you can also restrict them with other agents that like, check their information. So there is a very interesting discussion on like, accuracy of a result, let's say usability of a result. So, this is a debate I always have with climate scientists. Like if for you to make a sort of like an assessment of a design, you'll have to take a month for each design option that I give you. You're not useful to me because I have to make that decision in a week. So I'm not really going to be able to wait for a month, right? And then that's like kind of like the debate that I always have like with climate science. It's like, we also run a podcast and one of our guests said this once in one of our first podcasts, Giovanni Betti he's at Berlin Technical University. I think he said like every model is wrong. And this is not his quote. He said it. He's quoting someone else. That like every model is wrong, but some are useful, right? So it really depends on what you do with it. So there's a question of like accuracy versus usability, but then there's a liability kind of like question. Like if I am liable for, the percentage of the area here that is going to be like livable and you can, sue me for that, then it's a different discussion. So that's where it gets interesting. Like, we should always, like, you're not going to ask your AI, favored model to generate a contract for your employee, right? Like you're not going to do that because you fear the liability if you've written something that's completely wrong there. But you can ask it to generate something. You can check it with a lawyer or whatever, and then you can give it to them.
A draft. Can be.
Exactly. So you can also do that with designs. You can probably generate a draft and then go check them if you have to check them, right? Like the question is how many designs are today checked? You live in a house, most probably, and how often is this house checked for the climate? That's another stat. 80% of all buildings are built without any climate assessment, zero whatsoever. So from that to very accurate models, there's a huge difference.
Going forward, where speed, you said since last November you have been able to make 6 prototype, and in the industry where especially the speed, I don't know how much it matters, because we hear about like really long timeline for making a building, and it's very acceptable. Where do you think the optimizing of building with and the speed will matter going forward?
This is actually a very interesting point because I don't know the exact number, so I can't quote anything. But if, for example, the life cycle of, figuring out, like I'm going to build a building up to the building is built and people are inside and living, can be years, right? Like, you can find a piece of land and then say, I'm going to build something here. You can take 5 years until you have like a proper building, especially if it's a larger project. What's the timeline of designing that building though? It might be 6 months. Mm-hmm. It's a very small, or it can be like, 6 months to a year or something, right? Which is the design phase. It can be even smaller than that. What part of that design phase is the decision of the general form of the, like the sort of like massing, as we call it, the mass of the building? Perhaps it's like a month or two, right? It can be like much, much smaller. So how much time do you really have for assessing the climate performance of that building? Very, very little. So, and that's the interesting thing, right? If I choose to put windows on this side or the other side, or if I choose to sort of like, put this form here and this other form there, I'm going to affect 50 years of dwelling and, operating in that building. Yeah. Its energy, its climate conditions, its future climate performance, which is very questionable. How do we allow like, a couple of months or even weeks of decision making with very little or zero data affect 50 years of design decisions? It's a really 50 years of operation because of our design decisions. It's really astonishing if you think about it.
Regarding the environmental performance of the buildings, how do you see the impact of AI and the work that you are doing, that from my point of view is like the evolution of design builder, kind of? How do you see the efficiency qualification or something with these tools? How do you see it?
This is a very, very interesting point that I could probably talk for 3 sessions of this podcast about. But that's, for me, the most important, the most interesting question, right? When you're buying or you're renting a flat today, you're going to your favorite, engine for searching a flat, and you're looking for square meters. Like, I need about 80 square meters because I don't like a 2-person house or whatever. I need 3 rooms. It has to be close to the metro station. By the way, if it has a view, it's great, right? Energy efficiency. Maybe you have like, in some places you have like these letters that essentially just say, do you have like new windows? Do you not have new windows? Do you have, does it have a balcony? Yeah, great. Does the balcony, have an orientation, face the north or the south? Yeah. Less people look at it. What if I could tell you how many days per year that balcony will be unusable because of high winds? How many days per year that balcony would be unusable because of the thermal stress? If you're renting a penthouse, right? Like, or buying even a penthouse. What if I told you that in like, let's say 20 years, there will be like 20 days per summer that the temperature will be so high that, your energy bill will be off the roof, but also you might be seeing failing systems. What if we start like bringing in these ideas in, like, then you would probably think of a penthouse with a green roof that might perform a little bit better. Then that green roof becomes an element of real estate that's useful. What if you could, for every plot or every, house you build or every flat, have a full climate review and its risks and its performance. And that actually affected the price. Then the whole real estate engine, the whole real estate market completely shifts its value towards something that has more impact to you. And that's where I think, that's why I think this discussion is like very important and hugely interesting. One of the things we're trying to do with InfraCity is also that, making it possible for every real estate professional from land acquisition down to selling and buying property, design, policy, technology of the buildings, etc., to affect this value chain by bringing the impact that it has into. If you're selling green roofs, you want this to happen, right? You want to have the ability to prove to everyone in the real estate market that this has a hugely influential part. And I think that we're currently living in a bit of a shift in the world, like where people care more about geopolitics than they care about the climate. I do believe that this will change eventually, because one of the things that's certain is that the climate crisis will not stop because we just choose to look at a different topic. So therefore, I think that that's hugely important.
Talking about climate change, the design perspective in Europe was always about insulation and keeping the heat. And now with the heat waves, there's also a cooling perspective of it.
Yeah.
So do you have some real life examples where also with infrared that changing the facade or changing the land by a couple of meters that they can actually avail the design perspective way better?
It's very interesting in many cases, it's very interesting to see people always expect only one thing to happen with climate change. Like, for example, temperature increase. It's not always the case, right? We'll have more floods, we'll have more like extreme wind events, which for Vienna, for example, are very interesting, or for Europe. When you're looking at sort of like the performance of buildings, insulation is surely important.
Mm-hmm.
The design decisions, which is like, the massing, the windows, the openings, etc., are the very first step. So the insulation is like, essentially, I have these amounts of walls and these amounts of windows. That's what I can do with them. And then there's, of course, LEED and ASHRAE and whatever. Like there's tons of guidelines on how to do
certifications,
and also how to design properly. Right now, put a 40% glazing ratio in. But then you have Dubai, right? And then you've got literally glass towers in a desert with I don't know, some sort of coating or whatever. There is a huge discrepancy between performance and what people want. And that's where it gets most interesting. So I think in terms of affecting design decisions and making them more sort of performative, it's about also understanding perhaps the effect that you have on your own health and well-being. One very interesting point is light, quality of light, right? How many times have you been in an office where you have to actually bring in artificial light because the natural light is not brought in properly? Yes, you can make LED lights and you can make this more sort of efficient, but you could also bring these ways to bring natural light in that can be way more efficient than having to bring
from the design.
Yes, because I've seen that many times when people want to design floor plans that are massive and have no way of the light coming in. It's what were you thinking? I mean, and that's, in many cases, people don't know and don't understand the effects. So they say, okay, yeah, I have a floor plan that's 20 meters long. What's wrong with it? Yeah, there's never going to be light after 8 meters. That's what's wrong with it.
Yeah, and you mentioned a bit before about policy, that you want to be part of it. How do you see the evolution in Europe about energy efficiency in building, architecture, design, certification, etc.?
It is also a very interesting point. You see, taxonomy is already kind of not even there, failing or whatever, because again, our shifts in the interests. I think that it's very difficult to only drive the transition with policy. That's very, very difficult. But I think it is also playing a crucial role. And I think that the policy, instead of it being, let's say, restrictive policy on, sort of a blanket restrictive policy, it should be incentivizing more than restricting. having an energy efficient or like well-designed building should be incentivized even more, rather than making sure that, you know, everybody builds like with 40% glazing or whatever. Like, you know, it's, yeah.
I just have one question, and it was just coming in my thoughts that we went to Hamburg,
Yeah.
like 1 year ago, and we looked at a lot of energy efficient building. I've been to Oslo, in the center of Oslo. Also, you have a lot of energy efficient building. We in Vienna, there's a new building which are called very energy efficient, but they look very similar. Why is that?
That is another very interesting point. So like, you know, ugly energy efficient buildings. Like that was also something that I had heated debates with my architect colleagues, which care like so much about, you know, the sculptural, you know, I find this architecture also a little bit like, you know, boring, you know, sort of like, you know, the sort of like fluid form crap, if I may say. There's like questions on what is beautiful and what's not beautiful. For me, a building that I look at it is like full of green, and like there's like literally things. There's like green, like your pot here, right? That there's like green coming out of it is a beautiful building. For a lot of architects, it's not. The very fact that Midjourney was popular with architects with the literal crap that he was creating as a sort of like you know, apologies for the language of a sort of visual effect, I think, you know, is something we have to change. So what we consider beautiful or not, you know, and what we consider boring or less boring, we should probably reconsider based on something that's actually, you know, efficient, and, you know, nature is beautiful at the end of the day. But there's also a lot of debate of like, you know, when you're doing a sort of like an energy efficient building, sometimes you go with the easy solutions because it's not like the biggest trend, right? Like it's not that you're really trying, it's not that you're using all the cutting edge tools that you have to make the building more efficient. It's mostly to make it more beautiful, right? So like all the free form things that we're talking about could be used to make the building more efficient. And I always had the dream of like an aerodynamic building that actually takes wind in, channels it through, you know, internal channels, and you know, cools through Bernoulli effect and stuff like that the buildings. There could be that futuristic, beautiful solutions that we could think of. We haven't put so much effort on it, I think. And there is, of course, a lot of really high-end. There's also cost, but there's also high-end design that focuses on that. I mean, I worked in an office that we did a lot of that. But there's also like, you know, there's a cost and the drive. If you go to someone that builds like massive developments in, you know, I was in Riyadh in November, right? Like I haven't seen so many developments in my career before. And I've seen literally, you know, unit houses arrayed around like circular streets for no particular reason, just, you know, with their orientation shifting around the streets, which makes zero sense. Like zero sense in terms of like, you know, their performance. If anything, they should have been staying with the same orientation around, but they're just like literally like rotating around. And I think that's such a naive way of designing, that if that's, you know, the bulk of development, imagine how much, you know, room for improvement there is.
Now, since you are shaping a master program in Spain, in Catalonia.
Yeah.
How do you see this generation of students using AI and maybe relying too much in the AI answers and not with the creativity from, like, the spark from the architecture soul?
That's very interesting. So I'm going to try to connect the previous argument about like changing and shifting the value and also the AI revolution. Like we built this new program at IAAC, which is called the Master in AI for Architecture and Business Innovation. And then there's the business innovation part, which is very important there. So first, connected to the previous question. So like one thing is like, you know, training new architects to embrace and use and design with AI. And they could be designing new tools, but they could also be designing new buildings, right? It's both of these things, AI can be used. And the biggest question is, how can they understand the effect that these new innovations, new sort of like developments will bring to the value chain of architecture in general. That's why the business innovation is super important. If I make, let's say, wild example, if I make a floor plan generator that for any location in the world can take in the surroundings and it's sort of like the climate conditions and can optimize any sort of like, window and orientation configuration, right? What does this do to the architecture profession? What does it do to me as an architect? How does it change the business models? How does it change, the real estate world, etc.? So you have to understand that in order to be able to develop things that A, are impactful and positively influencing, society, and B, you understand what you're doing them. You're just not giving them out for free to someone and then to your, whoever sort of like star architect, and then you just, get paid a basic salary.
Pressing a button and then
yes, exactly, and then you're replacing yourself even by not even getting good value. So like there's a lot of there's a big aspect of it, and then there is the reliance on AI. I have to admit, teaching AI today is very, very difficult. I've been teaching generally not only AI but other topics to architects for about 16 years now, and I've taught in more than 20 universities. I have to say that the last 5 years, because we were like leading most of the AI seminars and studios in IAAC, together with my colleague Seryosa During and Stasia Fedorova, we've been doing a lot of like this sort of like seminars and also like outside of IAAC. And it is impossible to have a curriculum or to have like a sort of like, set of skills or things that you teach. 5-6 years ago, we were trying to get people to learn a bit of Python, do some sort of like, model usage through APIs, whatever, like writing code in Colab. Today, this is...
It's a prompt.
Prehistory. This is like, people come with, like, last week, they were running a workshop, Stasia and Yosa were running a workshop. They made an IFC checker, compliance checker, with the students in a week. Like a fully working prototype that tests IFCs for compliance in 5 different topics in a week, right? And that with students that never had any AI experience before. They had never touched code or they have probably prompted Mid-Journey and Nano Banana. The progress is insane and you can't really stop it. That's what like a lot of people are trying to. We also had this discussion a lot of times, like, we have to learn the basics and have to understand the models. I actually think that people who learn programming today will be obsolete in 3-4 years, right? Like there will be no need for programming. And I'm not saying that. Anthropic is saying that. Microsoft is saying like
Open Flow. Now Open Flow, the
Open
Austrian.
Flow. I actually posted this like 2 days ago. So like this is where people don't even understand what's happening, and that helps me sleep better at night because
he doesn't know the code. That's
there is this is the first $1 billion valuated one-man company that was developed within a couple of within a few months.
And he doesn't know the code.
I know. There's another very interesting story about someone that went to Davos with a smart contract device and they had to bring a developer to the police to explain what the code was because he couldn't explain what the device was doing. And he was in Davos and they were like accusing him. He was like lost the device number.
But one thing that is still challenging is entrepreneurship.
Yes.
Especially in this part of the world and spinning off. You were working at AIT, and how conducive was the environment for entrepreneurship and spinning off at AIT, and also if you just tell us how has been your keeping the research purity and also the hustle of being an entrepreneur.
I have to admit that when I started working at AIT, being a founder of a company was not even remotely my idea. That kind of like came naturally. And spinning off from AIT is not an easy thing to do. Like, Austria is not, the number one entrepreneurial mindset in the world. Europe is not sort of like the easiest entrepreneurial, and like not to mention AIT, right? I have a big shout out to 3 people that made this happen. One is, of course, Nicolas Neubert, who was back then the head of the unit that I was working in and saw the potential and told me from the beginning, I think this could be a spin-off and this is a very interesting opportunity. Hans-Peter Blachowski, who was the AIT startup catalyst, he actually helped me a lot creating a business model out of this because I was like, I had a research project in my hands. And of course, Alexander Svikovsky, which was back then and Anton Plimon, the CEO and the CFO of the company, that really made this helped me a lot. Alex and Anton both really fundamentally instrumental in making this happen. So what I'm trying to say is, if there's no people in an organization that see, interesting opportunities and try to make it happen, it's not going to happen. And I think Europe's biggest threat is that it doesn't have enough push for innovation and entrepreneurship. We really need, we need a Europe Delaware where we can start a company in half a day, and a sort of like pan-European university network that allows you to very quickly find another founder, form a company, start a spin-off, and then create value. We can't be debating, IP over completely different frameworks in different countries. This is very, very difficult as an environment. And that is probably one of the reasons why we don't have, the unicorns in Europe that we should have. And I think that there is movement towards that. But if I could be in a position where I could influence that, the number one thing I would do is like make a safe space for young people to explore value creation, and especially within European values, right? Like, I love living in Europe. I would not move out of Europe because I love the values that we share, like, human rights,
data protection,
privacy, but also environmental, climate adaptation, like caring about the world. And it's good that we are leading this example, because we are also the ones that have like screwed up the whole world for a while.
So it's maybe one example in Europe. It's Estonia.
Yes,
which are making a super startup ecosystem. So going into Central and Eastern Europe region, how do you see that your solution can help them to leapfrog all what happened in Western Europe, but to be applied immediately there?
It is a very interesting topic. I come from Greece, so Greece can somehow like also be considered Central Eastern Europe.
But you are in summer all the year, so
it's kind of like Southern Eastern Europe, but that doesn't really exist. We don't have an SE. It would just probably be just like Greece and Italy.
Yeah.
The reason why I'm saying that is like because there's like huge difference. I was just looking at this Eurostat like map of GDP growth, or like GDP per capita growth. I don't remember exactly what it was, and I saw Poland. For example, Poland has really crazy skyrocketed in terms of like development, specifically on tech solutions, right? Estonia with a very clever scheme of the digital citizenship, etc., like, which is one part, but like it's also creating the general ecosystem. I think the Central Europe, Eastern European, with some bright exceptions of our neighbors, I'm not going to mention the specific countries that like not sure they want to be in Europe anymore, but like there is like really a huge potential, and there's like less perhaps rigidity in governance that could allow this to happen. However, we see very different examples. Like Greece is not doing as great in this sense. And what I've been discussing with VCs in Greece, and like sort of like people who I'm actually there next week talking about some of these things, and the level of education in Greek universities is really great. It's like coming out of a Greek university, you like really know things, and having this talent pool and then not being able to sort of like bring it together to create like a tech space or something like that is really a missed opportunity. Corrupt governments don't make this very easy, but there is many things we could do. I could for Greece I could also have like a few podcasts, but the opportunity is the most important one. So like the CE's opportunity for growth is really immense, and I think that again, incentivizing, movement between countries, collaborative sort of like ecosystems for entrepreneurship. I was 3 times in Poland in the past 2 years, twice in Prague, Czech Republic, for innovation conferences, etc. So like, and also we've been with Mark, the investment readiness program of Erste. We were with other Central Eastern Europeans. I was in Podim last year. I actually won the pitching competition, for which reason somehow they put my face everywhere. It's kind of like ridiculous. But I apologize to anybody who saw my face for no reason. But yeah, like I mean that space, for example, in Podim, like showed me the incredible founders that there are there, and their ideas and like really like startups that have like very advanced solutions. If they were in Silicon Valley, I think they would probably been, thrown money at already. So then it's about creating a mini sort of Silicon Valley for the CE.
So that's the potential in terms of entrepreneurship. But what about the potential in terms of architectural solutions to like the potential of the region? Because with the Soviet buildings and how they could use this kind of technology to leapfrog the...
It's actually, so like architecture and urban development in CE is truly like, influenced by Soviet era buildings. But at the same time, when we're talking about urban planning, it does have a lot of sort of like good ingredients. It has more open spaces. It has like, it's not, and I'm not talking about Greece. Greece is, Athens is a really, like, it's one of the worst examples in terms of like, urban development. But, if you look at, Bulgaria, Romania, etc., like all the ex-East European, ex-East Bloc sort of countries, they do have some ingredients. Like some of the Soviet era urban planning wasn't that bad, to be honest. I'm not talking about the blocks, right? The potential is always, for me, related to, again, value creation. Like, if we are saying that Warsaw is growing in its tech sort of like industry, and there's like need for more, housing, etc., like that also brings an urban planning and urban sort of development incentive that helps, make things better. The one thing that we somehow like fail to do in all of Europe, and particularly in Central Eastern European and Southern Eastern European countries, is the greenification. And it's a pity because like there are open spaces, they can be like a lot greener, but we don't make them greener for some reason. And we're missing that part a lot. Again, my knowledge on Central Eastern European architecture is not like great, but from what I know, there is potential, like in terms of like the form, the massing of the cities, but there is a lot of need for measures for like resilience measures like water features, green features, shading, and protective elements that can be there, that can be implemented, but they need again incentivization, and they also need some sort of central planning and central sort of like policy.
Actually, I'm asking the question a little too late, but what is the typical project that looks like at Infrared?
There's different types of projects. So, for example, master plan projects, like projects that require, let's say, more than a few buildings. Let's say the waterfront redevelopment or other such projects. There is also more sort of like urban planning exercises, like landscaping. We had a really nice project collaboration with the landscape company. And it also can be sort of like policy checks. Like we have a good also project with the connected urban twins of the Hamburg city. So then they're using the simulations to check different sort of like policies, etc. So like it can be different scales, right? We also have projects that are not necessarily relevant to architecture. So we did a marathon simulator with Godo, a Japanese behavioral modeling company. Like we're looking at how people move, right? In this case, how marathon runners run, and how wind and the other sort of like climate effects affect their like routes. So that's another sort of like very tangential sort of like aspect, but really equally important.
So we got to the last part of the interview, the quick fire round.
Absolutely.
And I wanted to start with one advice for one person that want to acquire a new apartment or house, what they could review to take a good decision.
First of all, they can reach out to us if they want. But apparently, like we don't do like very very small. But yeah, there are many ways of checking today. The orientation. Even if you just like ask your favorite AI assistant, there's a house, this is the floor plan, this is its orientation, is this a good idea? And you can compare like 2 or 3 different ones. You will already get some sort of like, let's say assessment, initial assessment. You have to definitely check orientations, exposures to wind and solar aspects. And for sure, sort of like understand the general environment of your urban area. Like when you're going somewhere, right? It's not just you there and your flat. It's also like what's being developed around you. So if you're like there and then there's like a massive development next to you that will block all your sun, then your solar access in the winter is going to be like funny.
Okay, so orientation here in the northern hemisphere should be southeast.
Well, you're not going to find like, flats only on southeast, but like
No, but
where the openings are. Yeah. Like generally what we're trying to do is like, have a good control of the southern, like
south. Yeah.
the sun is hitting you on top from, up to a certain point from in the summer, which you want to avoid. And everything below a certain angle is, the winter that you want to get in.
Yeah.
So
exactly. But south oriented and eastern south is the best because in the southern hemisphere is the opposite.
Yeah,
so
true. But then how it gets complicated is like, yes, you can think about that, but then imagine if you're like exposed and you have like massive wind
sure.
drafts, right?
Many more.
Then all the sound sort of like, access gets hurt by the wind sort of like exposure.
Yeah.
It's complicated.
Yeah, it is complicated.
That's the orientation of the apartments and the building spaces. How important is also mobility?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, I lived the past 16 years without a car, so I would say it's for me it's hugely important like how to be able to be mobile without a car. Accessibility and connectivity is generally something you can also very quickly assess. The simplest thing that you can do is go on sort of like any map intelligence AI thingy these days and ask what is this location in terms of like its connectivity, its integration, its variability, etc. One of my co-founders suggested always using parallel AI, which is the sort of like specific does like really great deep research. Do a deep research on your sort of like location and figure out, is this place good, well connected?
And
but yeah.
Do you add such things in your stimulation as well, that how far is the EV charging, or what will happen with the heat pump? Or
we don't have that right now in the platform, but this is one of the things that we will be adding as we go. This is what we were doing at the City Intelligence Lab for sure, and like AIT's studies always do that. But yeah, absolutely, EV chargers is one thing, but also general metrics like closest parks, access to amenities like a playground, a hospital. Like you can probably get you can point in a map and get most of that information very, very fast today. Yeah.
What do you think is the importance of bridging academia and research with industry and include policymakers and innovation startups?
Yeah, I think that all these people should sit at a table and like like really talk. But for me, like that drives also my work. So like I will always want to have a connection to academia so that I inform myself of new ideas, cutting edge work and R&D to bring to the industrial sort of like aspect, the sort of like business aspect of things. And I think what sometimes policy is a little bit distant from all of that. So that's why I think that academia and business should be part of the policy making.
Now we can finally go to our quick fire round.
Yes.
What do you say is the most overrated smart city technology? IoT, sensor, or trash can, or passive design?
Oh my,
of making everything look similar.
I don't know if I can answer. I mean, like, I think that electric scooters are like a little bit too much, because I don't know. I'm joking. Everybody hates them a little bit, like, and then they love it because when they use them. IoT devices. I don't know. I think that there's a lot of like inventions or sort of like innovations that came that were not really that impactful, and they were more sort of like a gimmicky sort of like ideas, but I can't think of anything right now, to be honest.
Okay. You work in Forest and Partners.
Yeah.
That you said that it's an innovative firm.
Yeah.
But what do you think that is the most innovative spirit in this kind of companies or in a 3 people startup?
Well, big companies have big problems. So like, when you're like a 1,500 employee company, you always have like these issues. I have to say, I've worked there. I'm really happy of the time that I did there. And I've also worked further with the brand in general. But I just generally advise younger architects to not go for star architecture offices anymore. I don't think that this is their future. I think that they can today develop way more interesting and important sort of like solutions on their own. So I'm more for the 3-person studio, startup, whatever it is, doesn't matter.
Cool.
In Vienna, we see it. Everything is pretty much very nicely planned. But if you have 1 square to replan, what would that be?
If I had 1 square in like 1 block in Vienna,
1 block in.
well, I don't know if I would like. Vienna is so beautiful. I love I love living here. Like, and it's like a living museum. Every time someone comes here,
Nice.
like, yeah, exactly. Like every time I have a visitor, I'm like, let's look at what is there. So I'm not sure I would love to change something. The center would probably need more greenery. So I would like to not take a block, but take a street and really make it a jungle, right? Pedestrianize it properly. Like, the super block idea, that there's a lot of like pedestrianization going on, and people will probably hate me for saying that, but I'm like a big advocate for pedestrianizing the hell out of everything in a city. I think the greenification is what I'm somehow missing. And I think a lot of people are discussing, I think hard surface renovation or redevelopment is a little bit boring.
If you would have 1 billion euros, how would you invest them to accelerate any transition or to improve or foster more the technology that you are working on?
If I had €1 billion, first of all, I would probably reside in a Greek island for the rest of my life. But apart from that, which is a joke, if I had to invest it somewhere, I would invest it, and it will sound cheesy, and I'm in simulation. I'm a simulations guy, so I'm going to invest it in simulation. But I would invest it in a global city simulator. I'm confident that we can make with 1 billion euros. We can make this, which does one thing for every city in the world. For every, urban environment in the world, it can calculate the climate impact with the different scenarios, and it can generally allow you to play with solutions and scenarios in real time.
Nice. And that would be like a data center, or?
No, that would be an openly accessible sort of, software platform that or, framework that you could use. Or,
Nice.
If it has to be monetized, because we live in a monetized world, it would have to be, but yeah.
One piece of advice that you would have for the coming, I think you already gave a lot of advice for the coming architects, but another profound piece of advice that you would have for them, especially in the AI era.
Yeah, I'm going to be probably provocative here, but I would say forget architecture as you knew it, because really most architects get out of architecture schools with education of the previous century. Like, you need to really escape the mentality of, I have to draw everything by hand, and I have to sort of like, follow the sort of like guidelines of like, 50 years. You can liberate architecture quite a lot. And, it's one of the least innovated spaces in the world and one of the most impactful. I would also urge everybody to feel the responsibility. Most architects and designers and like, the sort of like, creative potential, and I want to, if you don't mind, touch upon this for a second more. They think that they're like doing something that's, less well paid, less sort of like, impactful, but more sort of like creative. And I think this is a very wrong mentality. What we're doing is hugely impactful, and it has a great impact on our lives and our like, well-being, and it cannot be reduced to something, it's a creative industry sort of thing. It's hugely important to have like, it has a huge responsibility. If 40% of emissions comes because of our mistakes of the urban environment, then we should not be thinking that we are the creative, cool people. We are actually worse than the oil industry in how we are affecting the urban environment. And for that reason, I want them to think the responsibility, but also the opportunity. So AI doesn't take any creativity out of people. The human brain is conditioned to be creative and innovative. No matter how much technology you throw at it, it will become more and more creative. So get that superpower that you have today, get your hands dirty with it, and remember of your responsibility.
Wow. Yeah. In that note, I heard that for 2050, we're going to double the square meters built in the world. in the cities. So the impact of architecture for sure is huge, and also energy intensive, and in all the OPEX, let's say, in the operation. So
we have a lot of work to do.
A lot of work. So thank you very much for coming today. Very insightful interview.
It was a great pleasure. Thank you for having me, and really very interesting discussion. We could be going on for like a couple of hours.
Yeah, so we have pending the talk about Greece, and the other episode was
what was it like? Oh yeah, there's like
about policy and certifications and
value chain.
But wow,
we can definitely touch upon that in the next episode. But we are going to have you in our June forum as well. So
exactly,
we're looking forward
very much
to that.
Looking forward to that. Yeah, and thank you for doing this. It's a very, very nice initiative, and I think that you should continue like building this knowledge, because I think it's very important.
Thank you. We are on it.
Thank you, Angelos.
And thank you to the community for watching the episode, and keep tuned for a next one here in the Energy Bridge. Ciao.
Bye.
Ciao, ciao, ciao.